Welcome, Sabina. Happy
Well, thank you.
Tuesday.
Happy
Thank you.
Tuesday,
Happy Tuesday.
or
Thank you all for
birthday, whatever we
joining us.
want to say, whatever Blair's Day it is today.
It is, and it's a beautiful day here, so in the Northeast. So welcome, everyone. First, I would like to thank Sabina for her support for Tech Up for Women. Sabina has been a keynote speaker since Tech Up for Women's first conference in 2017. So thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I'd like to give, before we start, I'd like to give a little background on Sabina's just impressive and fabulous bio. Sabina is a passionate transformational global leader with over 20 years experience. As the Pfizer Upjohn's Chief Information Officer, she is accountable for business technology strategy, operations, technology programs aligned with executive management and business objectives, for Pfizer Upjohn, a 10 billion plus business across 60 markets, 8 manufacturing plants, and over 12,000 employees, headquartered in Shanghai, China. Her team partners with business leaders spanning the globe. Sabina has so many professional awards, but to name a few, first of all, I'd like to point out her executive sponsor of Pfizer's engagement with Girls Who Code to inspire the next generation of women in STEM. She is a recipient of the Healthcare Businesswomen Association Luminary Award, U.S. Black Engineer and Information Technology Magazine Superstar, 2019 Women of Color Magazine Technology All-Star, and recipient of the Pharma Voice Top 100 Most Inspiring Leaders in Life Science Award. Just to name a few. Very impressive, Sabina. So before I turn it over to Sabina, I'd like to let everyone know, if you have any questions, there's a little chat icon at the bottom of the screen, and please submit any questions for Sabina, and we'll try to get to some of them after her presentation. So I'll turn it over. Thank you again, Sabina, for joining us.
Well, first of all, Cecilia, thank you so very much for that warm welcome. Like most women, I tend to blush when I hear about the bio, but I will, in this moment with all these Women for Tech Up, say thank you very much for including those recognitions. I also see my dear friend Dawn Pratt on the screen. Dawn, I have to once again thank you for not only the invitation and the opportunity to speak to this community that you've done an incredible job in building, but also for all the great work that you do, not only in connecting women in technology, bringing more women to technology, but beefing up their awareness around technology, which is so important. And I think their voice is so very much needed now. And so I know I'm looking forward to the conference in November.
Yes.
And certainly having an opportunity to talk more about something that I love, right? So, you know, this is my passion, which is technology. And the more women we can get into technology, the better. My goal is to be at a meeting where, like with Tech Up, where the line to the ladies' room is long when I'm at a technology conference. So to the topic at hand today, digital transformation in healthcare. So ladies, and I'll say ally gentlemen, if we have any ally gentlemen on the phone, my top line messages basically are, one, digital transformation has been here and is well underway. I would say that with COVID-19, it's simply amplified the capabilities and the deficiencies, for instance, in our healthcare system, that would require the transformation to really be supercharged, right? So I would say COVID-19 has helped to supercharge digital transformation across multiple industries and sphere. But, you know, before we dive in, when we talk about healthcare, I'd ask us to take a look at the past 4.5 months. And since this is being recorded, I have to do my diligence as a Pfizer employee. This is the disclaimer. The attorneys always invariably put that in the forefront, where, of course, these are all my opinions and certainly not the official position of Pfizer in any way, shape, or form, etc. Right? And so this, of course, is a dialogue and for information purposes. But again, you know, when we think about the last 4.5 months, As Cecilia mentioned, our particular division is actually headquartered in Shanghai. So we moved there a year ago. And so when I came home at the end of January and I left my Shanghai residence, I was coming 2 days before the start of the Chinese New Year holiday with the expectation that I was heading back to Shanghai in February. And at the time when I left, there were only 2 confirmed cases actually of COVID-19 in Shanghai. But what we've seen is how a particular virus, and in this case, COVID-19, and an ensuing pandemic really showcased our healthcare system, and in many respects showed how it impacted pretty much every aspect of our lives, right? You see here in these visuals, how certain dimensions of life that changed. I will tell you at Pfizer, we're a Cisco WebEx shop. So Zoom was nowhere really in my lexicon, right? And now it's pretty much a noun, a verb, you name it. And I was planning to attend 2 college graduations, a high school graduation, and Lord knows I had no intention of thinking about how we're going to handle homeschooling for a 10-year-old or finding, unique ways to keep a 4-year-old entertained. And thankfully, my husband has taken the charge, since he's a stay-at-home dad, he's taken the charge of helping to manage that. But we've had to figure out how that overall, right, has changed our agenda. And since we've all been in this, what I call 1 in 100 years type of pandemic, how it transforms, you see here, the depictions of parents working from home. You've got stay-at-home orders. You have masks being more regularly utilized in our day-to-day lives. For us, especially in the US, it's a novel new experience. Whereas in Asia, it's very common when someone might be under the weather or sick, if they're still moving about, they actually are wearing a mask. And so, we had to learn how not only to live in the pandemic, but as you see with the graduation, start leveraging virtual digital capabilities in order to conduct daily life. And so for the enterprise, one of the key elements around digital transformation that was exposed was whether or not you had the fundamentals and foundation, right? So when we talk about digital, you're talking about shoring up your network capacity, your VPN and remote access. But once you've stabilized that, depending on where you were in the continuum of your journey for digital transformation, it very much played into how much you could unleash around digital for your corporation versus you're just trying to catch up to get the fundamentals in place. So those companies and institutions that had embraced digital transformation were well on their journey, were better positioned, especially versus those that were earlier in their journey. And the pandemic, as I mentioned, exposed where you were on the digital continuum. And regardless of where you were, you really had to accelerate and engage more readily around digital. And for those of us who are in IT, if we had been faced with several reductions in our budgets over the last several years, those of us that realized that we still needed to double down in digital analytics and cybersecurity were far more better positioned. I give you this context because when we talk about digital transformation, I need us to recognize that that is a function of the 21st century. So those of us who are in technology recognize, and I call it 21st century technology, IT. And for us at Pfizer, we were in a unique position. I just left China. We saw certain things happening. The company put a task force together, right? The task force was dedicated to focusing in on China, but soon it became a force that we needed to use to guide our global response. And so companies had to be clear on their priorities around that. Of course, first it was about your people and making sure they were safe and secure and they remained healthy. Those colleagues or employees that were deemed essential, like in our case, our manufacturing employees and those in our research facilities, we had to make sure that they were not only enabled to do their jobs, but the mission profile of that job is enabling medicines that go to the 750 million people that take our medicines every year, right? And so we had to very much be mindful not only of the health, but also the supply chain. So I'm going to talk, when we talk about healthcare and digital transformation, around these two dimensions of the healthcare piece, as well as the supply chain that fits into that within life sciences. But figure the challenges weren't small, right? We talked about the health and wellness of the employees. We talked about securing the supply chain, but you have to also be mindful that, you know, inter-country travel was restricted. We had, you know, how were you going to get the drivers in with stay-at-home orders to get on trucks that would bring your medicine to your, you know, to your customers? And at the same time, you know, Pfizer's been engaged on how would we contribute to society, to public health, in the identification of a vaccine for COVID-19. So you've got all of those in there. So how then does all of this play in, right? You had the critical priorities, but you also had to be mindful that each country was addressing the situation differently, and we had to meet those in this unprecedented pandemic in our lifetime. A key enabler for us around all of this, of course, is technology. So here are some just simple examples of 8 ways in which some of the emerging technologies really enabled us to tackle the coronavirus pandemic, right? I spoke to you about living in China and subsequently seeing the government response. And so I'm going to give you the disclaimer, right? I recognize that China is an authoritarian government, right? And so I'm not saying that we can leverage those same practices in the United States, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what it looks like in terms of technology in other parts of the world. And so with that, you have the ability to use in China, for instance, their smart surveillance that is leveraging, for instance, smartphones and WeChat, which is a very pervasive platform in China. I would argue it's probably the largest on the planet in terms of, you know, messaging, social media, and integrations into daily life. But this was the mechanism that was used to enable QR codes as the country wanted to ramp back up. It demonstrated through a red, yellow, or green QR code your health status, whether you tested negative, whether you had been in contact or proximity with someone, or whether you had in fact the virus. So when I left, they had they had just started putting the temperature sensor readings in every single building you walked into. But now it transcended that, right? As it grew, that you needed this piece of technology in order for your health status to be known and your access and ability to actually do what you needed to do. And so, you know, contact tracing was another mechanism that this technology was able to enable in terms of, again, the economic rebound or bringing life back together there. Now, we're in the US, so I certainly wouldn't prescribe to those tactics or subscribe to them, given that our, you know, our beliefs and independence around privacy, et cetera. But every country had to find ways to adapt. And for us, we looked at another component here, which is really around, you know, virtual reality. So when we think about our manufacturing plants and society, you look at, you know, I talked about smart surveillance in terms of the lockdown of the economy, right, and those cities. But you also then had, you know, real-time supply chain monitoring that you needed to do. I talked about the drivers who were in certain cities and your plant's a certain place and you've got to get product to those folks, and leveraging that which had already been established was great. You know, augmented reality or virtual reality was another piece that played, because when you're looking at your manufacturing sites, the ability of you to, you know, if someone can't travel, but you need to repair, you know, perform a repair, or you need to do some, take an action within a site, and that subject matter expert may not be able to get there, using virtual reality and using capabilities that allowed for that monitoring, allowed for that engagement around it, was certainly clearly pivotal for us. And one of the other things you'll see here that I'll touch on is really around remote healthcare. And remote healthcare, some of us, you know, are familiar with teledoc, but telehealth in general. And what you find is in that space alone, and this is why I'm not going to go through all of this, because I'm going to double click on telehealth and I'm going to double click on the manufacturing space. But when you look at the telehealth space, there's a plethora of digital transformation that was helpful during the pandemic, but also very much in the fold going forward for the future. The analogy I would use is that when we think about telemedicine and telehealth, it's like where we were in the early 2000s, right? Most people weren't doing online banking, but once you got a sense of the security around it, reliability, and it could get all these work done, you saw a bigger stack that was established in terms of banking practices. So online banking right now is a daily, right, part of our existence. And so if we talk more about those technologies that were a part of the fight, in the case of telemedicine, right, you'll see here, this one talks about Teladoc, which is the lower left graphic, and you see the little stat there around, the ability to reach a physician, right, is less than 15 minutes, right, per, as they've articulated. But telemedicine is moving to what I will say is a full stack form of healthcare delivery. So this ranges from devices, the integration of those devices to platforms that healthcare providers use, virtual diagnosis and monitoring, remote visits, as we talked about in the consultations that you get with your healthcare providers, as well as e-prescribing. And so we've seen the important role also that chatbots can play. During the pandemic, the CDC and WHO both enabled chatbots to address COVID-19 inquiries, right? So you can expect as those algorithms build and those capabilities build, you will see more and more of their usage in that full stack of healthcare delivery I talked about. We also saw, and we'll see more about kiosks, right? You may experience a kiosk, let's say if you go to the pharmacy or even in your healthcare provider's facility, but now these kiosks are moving much further, right, in their capabilities. The ability to leverage 3D facial recognition for not only identification of who you are as a patient, but capturing and gathering your information, leveraging it for infection diagnosis, as well as capturing some of your vitals as well. And so, whether it is those, chat bots, whether it's the platforms for the engagement, and also I would say the e-prescribing piece, right? Some of us may have gone to our physician and based on their electronic medical record system or the system they have within their office, they will send a prescription to your pharmacy, the one that you select, the one that you say is the best pharmacy for you to go to. But I would say when Amazon acquired PillPack, the capabilities of e-prescribing was really brought to the forefront, right? You will see this is another space that will build out that stack of delivery such that the capabilities will go from that prescription initiated by the healthcare provider all the way through delivery at your doorstep, right? And we've seen how that has played such a pivotal role for us. You see on the top left here, about, in our case, for our sales reps, the ability to talk to physicians about our medicines, the ability to do that detailing because they no longer could go into the facility. The other piece is making sure that it's a convenient time for the healthcare providers because there are people who are focused on COVID patients. And oh, by the way, there are a multitude of non-COVID patients that they still need to care for and they need to be aware about the course of treatment for those individuals. So, being able to do that on-demand type of engagement is extremely important. Now, two things that everybody hears about, which are hot topics invariably, are artificial intelligence or AI and blockchain, okay? So I'll start with blockchain. And for anyone who knows me, I have to tell you that, I happen to be I don't necessarily, I think there's a lot of hype let me put it more directly. There's quite a bit of hype around blockchain. So the fact of the matter is I haven't necessarily seen as many implemented, solutions around it. However, as it matures, I expect that, it will offer enhanced security, the anonymity for coordination of care, benefits, as well as payments between patients, doctors, pharmacies, laboratories, insurers, and the like, right? Because it offers you greater control and security. And so, there are companies like Solve.care, who has a platform which is a blockchain health wallet, right? That allows for benefits across all of the different parties, whether it's the patients or providers, to connect in that way. I will also talk about, your Apple, your Apple Watch, your Fitbit, all of those devices that help to capture health data. Those will play an even bigger role going forward, right? Because it will capture information that you can leverage for your conversations with your healthcare providers. But there's also capabilities that allow the devices to actually integrate with the existing platforms that the healthcare providers are using. So, for instance, EKP is a company that makes an EKG and a stethoscope that can be used by physicians to monitor patients. There's a home diagnostic tool that Enzar at Home Diagnostics allows hemophilia patients to actually determine the coagulation of, their own coagulation status. And there are solutions like Bana.ai that offers real-time monitoring. And just imagine, this is a monitor. It monitors your temperature, your stress level, your blood pressure, and several other vitals solely through video. And, so some of these capabilities have already been clinically tested and are in use, and some are, further along the continuum of getting to day-to-day usage, and some are certainly in testing and validation. But again, I would say to you that it's really important that we see and recognize the way in which these technologies not only will be amplified, but certainly impact that full stack of healthcare delivery that I talked about. So we talked a bit about blockchain, but when we talk about AI, artificial intelligence, it's rapidly advancing. And so, I have to do a little bit of a plug here. 2 years ago when I spoke, or 3 years ago when I spoke at the first Tech Up conference, as Cecilia mentioned, in 2017, I spoke to the group about embracing artificial intelligence. And that was really because at the time I used the analogy that I was looking for my version of Rosie from the Jetsons. So if you know who Rosie is, then you're in my age group, in my generation. If you don't, you can Google it, all good. But I was looking for Rosie, who was going to help with, it was a robotic housekeeper. She was doing the cooking and the cleaning and all kinds of capabilities, helping around the house with the kids. So I was looking for my own Rosie. But in all seriousness, I strongly believe that it is extremely important that women and people of color are engaged in the creation and establishment of the algorithms that represent artificial intelligence, because your engagement will help to reduce the bias that can occur in those algorithms without your voice in the conversation, in the planning, in the development, etc. But my service announcement is done, at least for now. But AI really, as I said, is extremely important, expanding quite rapidly. It has the potential, and it is already capturing inputs around your data that it then feeds to your pairings with your healthcare provider. These algorithms can serve as patient triage. They are also building capabilities to determine the next best set of questions that are served up to the healthcare provider to then ask the patient, thus acting as a clinical decision support capability for the physician in the execution of your care. So, those talk about a lot of what happens in the telehealth medicine space. And if I go to the bottom right with the drone that you see here, it's sort of the foray into the other part of it, right? We've got all of this happening, and I figured this was a great way for you all to get a view into things that touch you daily in healthcare and in the care of your loved ones. But also, the other piece I talk about is then what's the medicines, because I'm in pharma, so, I have a view into that, and so I'd like to highlight just a few of those capabilities that tie back into the supply chain, right? It is very much been underway. The visual you see here is that of a drone. It is an area warehouse monitoring capability, but there's so much more, right? For us, the connected plant and supply chain in Pfizer are key to us getting those life-saving medicines I talked about earlier to our patients around the world, right? So this is really manufacturing, quality, and supply processes merge and systems, but the processes merge into a single seamless data-driven insights engine, right? A seamless data-driven insights engine. So what does that mean? It's about learning, right? This is the knowledge from the processes or systems instantly making available the insights, so that empowers the employer, the user, or the person leveraging this, to make the right first time execution, right? To perform that execution right the first time. And that's really important for us in terms of manufacturing. The other piece is that it's about visibility, right? It's visibility so that worker has everything they need to do their job, to execute that role on demand. It's also about predictive capabilities, right? And that's through access to operational and process data that, again, enable that real-time measurement of the operational performance and the prediction of future events. So as you can imagine, data is core to all of this. Data, and of course there's content, but data is core to this, right? Your users must believe in the reliability of the quality of that data, such that the real-time insights that they're getting, the predictive capabilities that we're talking about through these transformation, allows for that enhanced decision making, right? When I talked about AI, and the fact of the matter is these algorithms can consume so much more data than we as human beings can, even with a wealth of experience, right? And so you always want to make sure that the data that you're leveraging from your transactional systems, couple that against your decision solution, are really quality to enable that enhanced decision making. And of course, all of this comes together in this scenario that I'm talking about within the plant, in what can be called the digital plant, right? It's about a core digital operations center, and you couple that with a culture that fosters innovation through the exploration of new technologies, emerging technologies, all with the goal of how are you going to optimize the manufacturing operations. So just to give you some tangible examples beyond the drones, there are novel capabilities like the double robot. The best way I can describe a double robot is take an iPad, put it on a broomstick, and put some wheels on it, and watch that little thing whiz away around your plant, because that actually would enable virtual interactions and the ability to inspect your plant floors. So, it's something as simple as that makes a difference in terms of how you engage there, but there's certainly also 3D printing for certain elements of your supply chain, and 360 cameras for aerial and safety inspections, right? That gets to elements that you may not have gotten to in the past, and drones that can be leveraged to reduce risk and cost of inspections using high resolution and thermal imaging cameras, right? So I have shared with you and I'm mindful that I'm watching the clock. So Cecilia, I know that we've talked about this. And so the way I'll frame this out is, where do we go from here, right? I will say that you'll see a whole host of elements on the bottom we did not cover today. I think in the time that we have, I'll call it like, when you go to a restaurant, I happen to love dessert. So, there are the dessert samplers where you get a little bit of a sampling of some of the desserts versus just one big entree. So I know we haven't really we dove into some aspects of it, but not necessarily fully. So I will describe it as we just had our little mini desserts with the different tasting. But when we go from here, you will see the continued acceleration and expansion of these transformations that I shared. We didn't speak, as you see here, on like electronic medical records, but core to all of these is that one item that you see in the background further down the hallway away from us, and that's cybersecurity, right? Because all of these capabilities I just talked about that are in that digital forum really requires increased and heightened cybersecurity to protect and preserve data and privacy. So hopefully you all have enjoyed your sampling. As I've always said, I encourage you to own your own health, to explore and embrace technology. I trust that this has been informative and insightful to you in your little dessert bite. But again, before we go into Q&A, I really do implore each of you to really think about engagement in technology. And to the extent you're not in technology, I say jump in, okay? We need your voice. We need your perspective. We need your creativity to shape these capabilities as they are being formed, because it's digital transformation. So we're transforming our landscape. And so it's so imperative to lend your voice and talent to deliver impact in this landscape. So again, thank you very much for your attention for this dialogue. Cecilia and Dawn, thank you again for the opportunity. And Cecilia, I welcome any questions that we may have at this time.
Thank you, Sabina. Thank you so much. I wish we had another hour. We could continue going through all these wonderful slides showing technology in action. So thank you. We have quite a few questions. So let me start with the first one here. Legislation restrictions for telemedicine have limited usage. Do you believe the current lifting of these restrictions will continue post-COVID?
I do, right? So like, for instance, in the US, doctors couldn't serve across borders, and you've seen legislation that's taken place. I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle, right? Like I said, COVID-19 created us, helped us to really push us and advance our engagement. And so now don't get me wrong, there'll be work to do. There'll be, the legislation always has to, in my opinion, catch up to where the reality is. COVID pushed us to get closer there, and I think the legislation will still have to catch up to make sure that the considerations or concerns that folks have around care and patients and life science and healthcare remain valid. So we'll have to do that, but no way you're putting that genie back in the bottle.
That's good. Great to know. Another question we have here is the coronavirus pandemic has been an extraordinary event. How does Pfizer balance its research and testing for a vaccine for this disease versus other important research on other disease?
What's interesting is that, so we did a few things. And again, this is, I gave y'all the disclaimer. So I'm not Albert Bourla, who is our CEO, who does a fabulous job of articulating these things. But so a few things. One is all of the important medicines that we go after. We're always in the business of discovering new medicines, right? And we also recognize that in this moment, that it was unprecedented. And I will tell you, I watched Pfizer marshal the resources and talent that we have to substantially turn, I often describe Pfizer sometimes as an aircraft carrier based on our size, but let me tell you, we move like a speedboat when it came to this, because we recognize this is not just about medicines for a subset of the population. This is every single one of the 7 billion people on the planet. And so, we went through, certainly, there was a process that folks went through, and how were we going to not only make available our portfolio of assays. So, we opened that up and made that available for any researcher around the world to be able to get to. And the reason was, we recognized, and our leadership recognized, that we need more than one pharma company to discover this medicine, because you can't think that one pharma company can actually supply medicines for 7 billion people on the planet, right? And so, we looked at, what our history has been. So one of my prior roles within Pfizer was to lead the vaccines and oncology space under specialty care. And in my time with vaccines, we have an extraordinary group of colleagues in the vaccine space. Dr. Catherine Jansen, who's our head of research for vaccines, she'll tell you, we got the call from the leader over at BioNTech, who asked about that partnership once we said we're open and we're going to make available our capabilities, our manufacturing. So even if we don't discover it, if you need our manufacturing to be able to make that available to the public, we would do that as well. And so, she talks about that call that she received, and she was like, absolutely, we are looking towards public health, because our mission is to bring medicines that change patients' lives. And so I think, while we saw that substantial move and shift towards our ability to enable, the response for COVID-19, I also think it's a function of, us being able to contribute to greater public health. Those were the primary drivers for that move and transformation as well.
Great. So insightful. Thank you, Sabina. That was great.
Absolutely.
Now this is a question. Again, we're honored to have you here, and thank you again. But as a woman, as an advocate for women in technology, we'd love to know how your career started and led to your current position.
So, here's the interesting thing. I often tell the story that when I was in high school, I was going to be a big-time international business lawyer. That's what I used to tell my friends. It had to be big time. It couldn't be just regular, it was big time. But, what I found is there are things that you've encountered in your life that have a pivotal impact on you. So I actually started coding at 10 because I watched my father, who was an accountant. He saw that the personal computer was going to make a massive difference in the world. And so he spent every bit of time and energy on learning the PC. And I was right there learning it as well, right? Unfortunately, he had cataracts in both eyes by the time he was 35. And so, that's how much time he was spending there. So I kind of grew up with IT behind me. I was coding since I was 10, always, in those programming classes. The folks who grew up, in the 80s, around, in high school, what have you, that, there were coding classes. And you didn't see the same gender ratio of more men. There were actually more women in IT in the 80s than there are in the 2000s. And so, it was that drove me to major in MIS and finance at the University of Virginia, and then started my career in consulting. And consulting was a great career starter because I was with Arthur Andersen, and it really allowed you to, go into different clients and enact and be able to build out technologies. Back then it was custom development, because like I said, I was a coder. And so as a part of the advanced technology group, we were building custom solutions. However, I will tell you a pivotal point for me also, another one was, when Arthur Andersen was indicted in the Enron scandal, I decided that I needed to be doing something different. And, when you're a consultant and you're on the plane all the time, I figured the best thing I could do was give back to society. So I actually left business and became a 5th grade school teacher. I taught 5th grade in the South Bronx of New York City. And the reason I make mention of this particular change, this particular moment in my journey, is because it changed my risk profile. So I went from being risk averse to someone who would take on the biggest risks, having taken that particular risk when I came back to business. And so hence why I could move to Shanghai, you know, in 2019 and just take it and go from there. But after my time in consulting with Anderson, with Bearing Point, and then with American Express in a business consulting internal practice that they had, I joined Wyeth and I joined into pharma. I've been in pharma now for almost 13 years. And I have, sponsorship has been an incredible part of that. I often talk about my former boss, who is Pfizer's enterprise CIO, Jeff Kiesling, and the pivotal role that Jeff played in sort of recognizing what my talent and capabilities and supporting me and providing those opportunities where, I could be, his chief of staff, and then I could go run specialty care and oncology and vaccines and oncology in tech. All of this is in technology, and then go on and, run the corporate functions and all of the business services for Pfizer as a whole, such that it prepared me for when an opportunity with as he often says, I like to stick my head in the wind. When I took that risk averse person that came out of that, CS 66 New York City public school, risk, less risk averse, more willing to take on risk, more willing to put my hand up. Those have driven me to, being able to take on this role as a global head for Upjohn's technology organization. Hopefully I did that in a good enough way.
That was fascinating. Absolutely. Just fascinating. I think we have time for one last question. A woman that wants to pivot her career, what recommendation, what's the first recommendation that would come to mind?
So if you are in an organization, yes, if for instance, if you're already in an organization and they have a technology organization, one, it always helps to kind of have conversations with people to understand what they do, to actually see if you like it, because there's a whole range of what technology jobs look like. So that's number one. So you learn more, and then you certainly can decide which spaces that you have. The other piece is, if there's a project that is going on that will give you a foray into certain dimensions of technology that you're interested in, raise your hand. Listen, the one thing Sabina always does is raise her hand. And I think that's been pivotal for me. So I would tell folks, if there's a project, raise your hand. Always, be willing to connect and speak with people so that you can understand what they do, so you understand whether or not there are certain dimensions or a certain area in IT or technology that is of interest to you.
Great. Well, Sabina, thank you. This has been fabulous. It is our hope that we will have you on our main stage on November 17th at Tech Up for Women. And again, thank you for all your support and for all the information today.
Absolutely. Thank you again. I really do appreciate the opportunity. This is fun. This is the highlight of my day. So thank you all so very much for the engagement around this.
Thank you, Sabina. Have a great day.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye now.